Welcome to the new episode of All That Jazz. I'm your host, Matyash, and today I have with me Kevin Pringle. Welcome to the podcast, Pringle.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I don't know why I said Pringle. I used that O'Reilly line. I know Bill O'Reilly used to call people by their last name, I think.
Oh, people do it to me all the time.
So I know you're from the, I've seen your pictures around and all that from the Dr. Hawkins connection. And obviously Dr. Hawkins is a hugely influential person in my life. So, okay, let's start with the beginning. How did your spiritual journey start?
Yeah, good question. I grew up in an atheistic household where the belief in God was ridiculed. But myself, I didn't necessarily own that, but that was the environment I grew up in. And as time unfolded, I watched an interesting TV show about apocalyptic prophecies. And it struck some chord in me. Like, what if this is real? Like, what if God is real? I should probably know about this. And so that got the ball rolling. And then right around the time I was 18, I had a friend. And one day he changed drastically, like overnight. And at the time, we were young knuckleheads, smoking weed and being silly. And he changed. He stopped smoking. He stopped swearing. He had a light about him. And it really struck me.
You could tell that
something
he was different.
changed.
Yeah,
something changed. And a few of our friends had asked him, like, what is going on with you? And he said, I would tell you, but you wouldn't understand. And that really stuck me. And a little voice in my head said, take these guys home and come back. And I did. And when I opened the door, he said, I knew you'd be back. And it was one of those, it was before the Matrix, but it was a Matrix moment where it was like, oh, the rabbit hole is about to go deep.
Right.
And he told me, he basically had a revelation, like an apocalyptic revelation out of nowhere. And he described it to me. He said, I don't know what to make of it. It was the craziest moment of his life. And we had a good talk, but, he told me a lot of things. And I didn't necessarily, I knew he wasn't lying. Whether what he experienced was true or not is something else. But I knew he wasn't lying.
Right.
And at that moment, I just knew there was a God. I knew there was a God. That was a very real moment. And so my curiosity grew. And a couple years later, I tried to read the Bible, but it was very hard to digest, the these and the thous, and just, as Doc would say, the light tends to be dim in organized religion.
Right.
And it was for me. So one day I did a Google search on how to know God. I was like, man, I wish there was a book on how to know God.
Right.
And come to find out there was. And I bought the book, and it just pressed a button in me again. And it spoke more about the different levels of consciousness, and the different perceptions of God based on different consciousness spaces. And that really struck me. It's as we go through the path, I think one of the reasons the Doc's work strikes us is the truth is always there. It's maybe veiled through a thick fog of perception and ego, but the truth is always there. We know it. So when you read it, when you see it, it strikes that chord. And that book did a little bit of that for me. And then I got into really aggressive reading of spiritual books. I was, whatever the popular book was, I got it. I was reading it, and I couldn't read it fast enough. And so after a while, I got into like book collecting. It wasn't necessarily reading them all, but whatever the book was, I was getting it. And then right after September 11th, there was a prophecy that was sent out, an alleged Nostradamus prophecy that was allegedly about the moment of 9/11.
Right.
And that, because the apocalyptic thing was kind of where it started, it really moved me. And I was like, well, I don't want to just believe this email. I have to read for myself. And I went to the bookstore, and I felt a magnetic vibe to a certain part of the store, and I followed it. And there was a lady there, and the nonverbal message was, I need to talk to this lady. And she started talking to me, and that turned into a 4-hour conversation in the middle of the bookstore, about spiritual matters. And she had a certain relationship with Christ that she spoke openly about, and that really moved me. But when it was all said and done, she recommended I pick up this book, Power versus Force.
Right.
And I did. And at the time, my studies were primarily Eastern, and I had a stereotype of what a true teacher was supposed to look like.
Like a guru, like a guru.
A guru, yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's where the credibility was for me. And this book that was, Dr. David Hawkins, MD, PhD, it just didn't make me open the book right away. And so after about probably close to a year, I never looked at the book. And one day, it was a rainy day, and it was like, dude, this book was brought to me in a profound moment of my life, and I've never looked at it. And I started reading it. I just read the preface, and I just saw it. It was like, oh, this guy's legit. Like,
Can I ask you about that? Do you think sometimes it's destiny for people? Like, because I know I've given some people I've given out a lot of letting go books, for example, but I doubt, I think less than 10% actually read it or are going to read it. Maybe. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's really low. Do you think it's, you're just not ready, or is it, you think it's like almost like a destiny, like you're destined to find this teacher or that book, and that's gonna be a catalyst to you to propel you?
I think both. There's an old saying that when you're ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah.
And when you're really ready, the teacher disappears. And I think especially with Doc's work,
yeah,
you have to kind of be aligned with it to get it. Sometimes it's hard to digest. He uses big words. It's extremely profound in how deep it goes. And so not everyone resonates with that. So yes, I think there is a destiny about it. There's an alignment that when your alignment, whatever your frequency is, you attract that to you. And so when your alignment is for truth, like really for truth, the truth will come to you. And whether or not you are willing, willingness is a big deal in spiritual evolution.
Right.
If you're willing and open, it will appeal to you. And I think it also depends on your hunger. A lot of people don't really want the truth. They want comfort, and they want familiarity, and they want to read a bunch of poetry about, love, and love is beautiful, and that makes them feel good. And
there is Rumi. Rumi is pretty good. I think he's.
No, I love Rumi. Rumi.
But that's associated with like, this flowery language. This.
Well, Rumi was a poet.
Yes.
But a lot of spiritual teachings that I would say are not the real deal. There's somewhat of a. It's not that they're devious. It's just that you write about love, and you write, about how great love is, and it sounds really good.
Yeah.
But Doc would say it doesn't bring you there. You could read those books, you could read those things, and it sounds great, but it doesn't move you 1 inch closer to the truth.
Right.
So, I've seen that with a lot of spiritual aspirants where, Doc's work's a little bit too thick for them, and they'd rather read something that maybe is a little more popular, and there's a lot of worldliness, like The Secret, it's manifesting things in your life, and that's very egocentric. Whereas Doc's work, he would say the work of enlightenment is to transcend the world, not to be absolutely enraptured by it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is an alignment. It is a frequency, which could be called destiny. It's your direction.
But also, it's a part that the future is calling you. I think Doc alluded to that. That the future, your future is pulling you towards itself.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and Doc would say you're not pushed by the past. You're pulled by the future. And when one chooses a path, that alignment is drawing you closer to it. It's at some point on the path that grit that pushes you ahead becomes it's like a spaceship going to outer space. And Doc uses the same analogy, that to get off the earth, it takes tremendous force, tremendous power to get off the ground. At some point, the momentum is just pushing you along. And it's the same in my experience with with God is, once you get to a certain space, God is completely has your hand and is pulling you towards him.
Mm. So what happens? So you open the book and you start reading Power versus Force.
Yeah, and it was the most profound book I've ever read at that time. I was like, whoa, and it pressed every button in me because, I'm into intellectual things and I'm a Western man and a modern man. And these were speaking in modern terms and breaking things down in a real way. And I just got it. And, I had all these other books from a bunch of different teachers, and some of them were reputable, but they just didn't touch all the buttons that this book did. So I looked him up on the web and I saw he was giving interviews online, Beyond the Ordinary.
Right.
So I listened, and the second I heard his voice, it was like, yes, this guy's legit. I hear it, I feel it.
You can just tell. You could just
tell, and his sense of humor, everything was just right up my alley. And looked him up some more, found out he was giving lectures and that they weren't far away from me. So that was like a moment of real excitement. This is not some teacher who's on the other side of the globe. He's right here, an hour flight away.
Wow.
And so,
because you're in California, right?
Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area.
And so, what year was it that you actually started reading Power versus Force? Do you know?
About 2002.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so
this is really early on.
The book was brought to me, right after September 11th. So that was late 2001. It probably took me close to a year to even crack it open. So it was sometime in 2002. In 2003, I was just full on into the work. I bought every Beyond the Ordinary interview, read every bit of Power versus Force, was all in, and then signed up for my first lecture, which was August 2004. And when I went there, it was a pleasant feeling that there were so many people who felt the same way I did about the work. And it was like instant kinship. And, sitting there at the lecture was just amazing. The energy there can't be described.
And the people there, I met the most amazing people at the Doc lecture. So I think it was the kindest people, the most amazing, like awesome, like just like heavenly almost being there. I think it's Doc's energy probably influencing all of this, but anyway, it was just the people also were of high caliber, I would think.
It's the energy of those who are aligned with the work, and to be aligned with that work, you have to kind of be there. Your alignment of your heart is different.
Yeah.
And all of us were touched by the work in that way. And so it was a great, great moment in at that experience at the lecture. It was like, okay, this is my teacher. There's no other work. I could take every other book I have and just throw it on the fire. It's just not doing much for me. And after that, my whole life was revolving around the work. All I did, I bought the whole 2002 lecture series. I listened to it every single day, on repeat, endlessly. And in 2005, I went to every lecture, without fail, and became close. During that process, I was part of one of the Yahoo groups, and I never talked about the teachings with anyone. And so now there was this little discussion forum, and I'm talking about it all the time. And one day I woke up and this guy sent me an email. It was the owner of the group, and it said, "You are now the owner of the group." And he said, "Hey, you're a machine. This group is a little too much for me. Have fun." And so I became the owner of the group, and that led me to be friends with Lou, who is or was Doc's neighbor. And he also facilitated the satellite room with the lectures. So I would come down a little early for the lecture. We would hang out, talk, and fellowship.
Can I ask, like, was he like literally like next door, or was he like a couple?
No, literally, he's on the property. Doc had the whole property. I think he had the whole property. But yeah, there's a house that's right there next to Doc's.
Right.
And actually, he had said that Doc helped him get the house. When the house went up for sale, he said, "Hey, I'd love for you to be my neighbor."
Oh, wow, that's just
amazing, right?
Amazing.
So yeah, Lou was his next door neighbor, and so I would go there all the time, and we would hang out and, like I said, talk and build and share stories and all that. And then I started helping them with the satellite room, setting that up. And so it was, kind of a little bit of a part of the the whole function of the lectures, not a major part at all, but I would go there, help set up, and it was an honor to do it.
The satellite room, for those who don't know, I think it was I was not there, but I saw some footage. I think it was a room because there was a famous Sedona what was the place? Creative Center, I think it was.
The Creative Life Center.
Yeah, Creative Life Center. And then in the back they had a satellite room, which was basically a big TV, and they had people watching it from there, right?
Yeah, so there,
okay.
in the lecture hall there was 200 seats, and for the overflow there was the satellite room. The ticket was a little cheaper, but you were there, and you would watch the lecture. It's not a live stream; it wasn't internet back then. I mean, there was internet, but it wasn't set up like that. But
I would pay a lot of money to be there, to be at the actual Creative Life Center there. That seemed just like an amazing place.
It really was. And when you walk in, they're playing Om Namah Shivaya, and that little, I think it's Robert Das, that CD was playing on repeat, so it had a little bit of a cathedral feeling. And then the excitement that everyone had to be there was very tangible. And the people that got it, the people that read the work and got it, knew what was happening there. That, hey, this is rare. This teacher is legit. And so there was that childlike excitement within the crowd, and that was nice to be around too.
Can you tell, like, when somebody was there for the first time and they were so like,
oh yeah,
when I was there for the first time in Los Angeles, in I think it was Long Beach, in a Hilton hotel, I think it was just so amazing. And I
was there too.
Oh, really? Like March 2008? Wow.
Yeah, I was there.
I spent all my savings to go there, and that because I saw it. I was watching his lectures, and I thought to myself, it looks like he's going to die pretty soon. And I was not off by a lot, actually, because he died 4 years later. So
yeah, well, I think after 2005, I mean, he was always right there on the edge, and there was one lecture where he almost left the body right then and there, and it was the whole crowd's breath kind of held, like, whoa. And he was already elderly, so we knew that he wasn't going to be around for forever. And but the lectures started getting really big. A lot of people started showing up, and that's when they started doing the bigger places like Long Beach. I think there was 1,500 people there.
Yeah, I think it was actually fortuitous the way he left the body, because I think if he continued with the lectures and if he was still healthy, I think it would just exponentially grow, and it would be hard to manage almost the kind of fame that he would garner, I think.
It was getting there. It was definitely getting there. Towards the end of his life, he did an interview with Oprah. There was things that were starting to get out there.
Yeah.
And he had said that, early in the early days, Nico was his good friend, and Nico put together the Highest Level of Enlightenment series. And he spoke about how Doc spoke about the energy of work. So like his work had such a frequency, he didn't really need to market it. It markets itself. And Doc had said that the work will spread. It's, he wasn't concerned with promotion. And I see now that it's spread more and more. I think 2 weeks ago or something, Russell Brand did a feature on letting go. And I was like, whoa, all right, it's getting out there.
Yeah, and the way he found it was somebody in a 12-step group, probably in AA. Maybe I shouldn't say, but I don't know which group he's in. But somebody in a 12-step group gave him the book. So it's
nice.
Amazing. It's amazing the way it spreads. Just like, yeah. So I think some people would like to hear the story. So a lot of people, I know some Doc students now that have found Doc after he passed away, and I feel, I now feel so for, even though I'm from Europe, I've seen him like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. So I was so fortunate to see him,
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about Hawkins the man. So did you, we talked off air about that visit one time. You were visiting Lou.
Yeah. it was I was, you know, every time I would go down there, I would visit Lou and we'd hang out at his house and we were talking and we were outside and all of a sudden he came out. Him and Susan were on their little golf cart to get their mail and he saw us and he just came over. And you know, when you see him, you feel the energy and everyone's kind of like, whoa, you know, and what is this? And you also, when you're there, you're very mindful that it's his private space. You don't want to intrude, but he came to us and he just small talked us. And, you know, he was joking around, you know, he's like, you know, Susan says I have to get my hair cut and I have to take a shower. And he was like, eh. He
For
said,
the
if I was
lecture.
meant to, yeah, the lecture was the following day.
Yeah.
And he said, if I was meant to be wet, I'd have gills and fins. And, you know, just joking with us. And afterwards, you know, it was a brief encounter and he told Susan, he said, let's stop molesting them. And then they took off. And then afterwards, we all kind of looked at each other like, what was that? You know, and Lou is pretty proficient with the muscle test. And they tested afterwards that it was a deliberate blessing why he came over. You know, he came over to bless us. And we all felt that. And it was such a subtle, like just to talk about it doesn't sound like anything profound, but it really was. You know, to be there and to feel it, it was like, whoa, all right.
Yeah.
And there was another moment around that time, you know, this is early 2000s, mid 2000s, you know, the terrorist threat was a big deal. And, you know, Doc spoke very openly about the fall of Islam and radicalism itself. And there was a student who, for whatever reason, adopted a child in an Islamic country. And she moved out there. She had to move out there to be with this child.
Right.
And what happened, what was found out was that Doc's books were on a list of no-nos. These books are not to be had.
Right.
And they actually had like a state police that can kick in your door anytime. And if they found the book, it'd be a big problem. So she was really worried about that.
Are you at liberty to say which country it was?
I can say I don't think it's a problem. It's Malaysia.
Malaysia, okay.
So, you know, Malaysia is an Islamic country and, you know, they're organized enough to where they could handle some business. So right. She was, you know, a devoted student and she was really upset because she's like, hey, you know, I have this calling of my heart to be with this child, but, you know, I can't have the work around because anytime they could come in my house and, you know, it could be severe. And when it was found out that the work was on a list, you know, a no-fly list, there was a certain concern, you know, amongst us, you know, right. Worldly folk. It was like, oh no, you know, this could be really bad. So after one of the lectures, we waited and we saw Doc and we went up to him and we were talking with him and it was brought to him and said, hey, we want to let you know, your book is on this list and they're not very big fans of you. And they said that you desecrate Islam. And in my head, there was going to be an alarm of like, oh, you know, but he didn't flinch like at all. And he looked right at me. He said, I don't desecrate Islam. Islamics desecrate Islam. Only a Christian could desecrate Christianity. Only a Muslim could desecrate Islam. All I do is tell the truth. Wow. There was no fear. There was no hesitation. And the answer was so automatic. And we were talking with him and he started talking about different teachings and how, you know, during the Crusades, the Christians desecrated Christianity. You know, they killed in the name of God. Right. And how the big religions, Islam and Christianity, they go through that phase, you know, where, you know, I think Christianity is 500 years older than Islam. And that's where Islam is now. They're in that phase of the twisting of the truth and killing in the name of God. But Christians did it too, you know, right. During the Crusades. And he spoke all about that. And when he was speaking, it wasn't like he was speaking. It was an automatic teaching mechanism within consciousness that just.
But Doc also calibrated the fall of Muhammad and all that. So that's why I think maybe they banned it.
No, he did. Well, I think it might have been my very first question to him.
Oh, really?
That.
Okay.
Yeah. So my very first question, because I read that, and you know, he had his moment where the Quran was dictated, and the Quran itself calibrates really high,
Yeah.
very high. And Muhammad had this moment, and you know, when you read the teachings, you're like, okay, um, when you reach a certain level, once you pass 600, you know, 700, you're supposed to be safe. You know, there is no personal self, and there is no fall. That was the perception.
Right.
We spoke about the fall and how you went from 700 something to like one something, and
130, I
that,
think.
yeah, and that frightened me because it was like, whoa, you know, once you reach that level, and the temptations at those levels are much more subtle and much more deadly. So I was really scared. You know, it was like, you know, I don't want to reach the high levels and then crash on something I don't understand, or, you know, some seduction.
Yeah.
And I said, how does that happen? You know, he reached the level and he fell. And, you know, he said it was also part of temporal lobe epilepsy that he had that. And that was a contributing factor.
Do you, I understand. I've obviously read that answer, but I don't quite understand it. Do you think it was through the physical deficiency that somehow the demonic, for lack of a better phrase, came in and kind of subverted his spiritual?
Well, well, when I asked Doc, he said, and you know, Doc would give you the Zen whack, right? The Dutch uncle, where you'd be a little tough. You
Yeah.
know, it's all love, but it's very direct. You know, he's not candy coating anything.
Yeah.
So when I asked him, I was like, how does that happen? He's like, you ever heard of karma? Like, come on. Like, it was out, it's just karmic. And he said that it was concomitant, the epilepsy with the fall. It wasn't a cause.
Right.
It was just in that frequency, there was also the temporal lobe epilepsy. There was also the opening for the fall. And that it was really a misholding of the teachings of the sword. You know, Christ would say, I don't come to bring peace. I came to bring the sword. And then the Crusades were spawned from that.
But he
So
meant the sword of truth. But Muhammad took it the sword of actual sword when after he fell.
Exactly.
Right.
And well, but even the term the sword is, if you read the Lamps of the Bible, which Doc recommends, and I do too, that term, the sword, is an Aramaic expression for division. So it's not really the sword of truth. I mean, Doc said it was, you know, the sword of truth, but when you read the Lamps of the Bible, it does illustrate that it's an Aramaic expression meaning division. Because when you are aligned with the truth, that will create division. You know, I've experienced it in my life, and I'm sure we all have. That, you know, and Doc would say, when you speak the truth, have your foot in the stirrup. You know, get ready to get out of town because people don't like to hear it. You know, and
yeah, like even speaking about this, maybe some Muslim will get upset and all. I realize, or maybe I'll get censored or whatever. But I, you know, I'm that's the risk I'm willing to take. Well, okay, this is a question that popped into my mind. What about somebody that in the future that may be watching this that's Muslim and discovers dark work and is conflicted because it might challenge his faith?
That's a great question. Actually, some of my very best friends are Muslim, and I have friends with a Sufi order out here, and I've actually done some public speakings with them. And it's one of my favorite expressions. Doc said, he says, the problem with religion is that people tend to worship the lighthouse and not the light. And so what Islam means is submission to God. So if you get caught into all the, you know, the personal feelings, the defensiveness, all those things, you're missing the point. You know, Allah does not need you to do that. If you're really submitting, truly submitting, the path will unfold. You know, I actually like Islam. I'm not a Muslim, of course, but in its core, it's submission to God. That's a beautiful thing. And one thing Doc said is that the one thing Islam does better than other religions is get adherents. You know, praying 5 times a day, living that life. They do it better than other religions. Yep. So when one is truly, truly a servant of God and really willing to sacrifice any belief for the no, you know, there's nothing wrong with Islam. And even to worship, and it's in it's in all religions, you know, worshiping, and like in Catholicism, there's the worshiping of the saints, worshiping Mother Mary, you know, and in Islam, there's a certain way they hold Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah.
You know, he is God's last and best prophet. But I think even within that, there's an error in that it's not about them. It's about God. It's about truth. It's about submitting and letting these things reveal themselves. Because when you do that, it's obvious. There's no questioning that's even needed. So yeah, if you are a Muslim and you are watching this, maybe interested in the doc's work or even feeling a certain way about this, it's nothing against Islam. Islam is a profound religion, and it's a very high calibrating energy. But like in any organized religion, there's parts of it. It's the people. It's not the religion as much as it's the people. You know,
Right.
the misinterpretations.
There is a saying in 12 step groups, principles above personalities.
Yes.
And I love that because it's the principle, like, do what God wills, you know, and give glory to God.
Yes.
Inshallah, whatever they say, and giving glory to God, but that doesn't mean like. But it's hard to reconcile. I get it. Like if I was Muslim, I'd find it very hard to reconcile that somebody worshipped fell.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Kind of like Osho, for example, to give another example, a very popular guru, but somebody that fell from the 500s, I think it was, to below.
Mm-hmm.
So and another example, but that's another temptation, I think.
Yeah, and temptations are all along the way. And actually, one thing in that conversation with Doc, where we talked about, you know, the Islamic threat to him, he explained how it came about. That there was two people within Islam that spawned the radical, and it was Sayyid Qutb, Qutb, and Wahhab. And the radicals are typically called Wahhabis.
Right.
And they're the ones that took the words, you know, the sword, and, you know, some of the darker verses in the Quran, and there's dark verses in Christianity too. But they took it and they ran with it and they turned it into something else. So those two people who calibrate incredibly low brought about a lot of hell. You know,
right?
But
it's like those two people are they took the negative Muhammad and they interpreted in a even negative way.
Well, the other thing to it with the Quran is the Quran itself is what was dictated from the Archangel Gabriel. It's the other part of it is the Hadith, which are the writings of Muhammad.
Right.
And those are different.
Those are more problematic than the Quran, I think.
Yeah, it came from a different time and a different place, you know, and the Quran itself was a different source.
I think that there's a writer called I'll see I can't remember her name. She wrote a book called Nomad, I think, or she used to be in Netherlands. She was a politician for a while. Then she went to US. I'll put her name in the description. Anyway, she said she started one of her books that in one of the hadith said that Muhammad looked at hell and he saw most of the people in hell were women. That's that must be like a bad joke from the 80s. Like, think about that.
Probably a lot of my ex-girlfriends.
Oh boy.
No,
So okay, let's talk about muscle testing, something that I think a lot of people find kind of they get turned off by it.
Yes.
So what's your understanding of it, and how do you reconcile it for people who are like really on the fence about it?
No, that's a great question. I think the biggest problem with the work to someone who's not familiar with it or is more posture to be skeptical is the muscle test. And I understand, I really do. I don't muscle test myself because one, I feel like docs muscle tested everything I need to know.
Right.
And I also don't trust myself, because there's so many subtleties and I just don't have the interest to do it. I just submit, I pray, I contemplate. The Course in Miracles is a big part of my walk.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't muscle test. But if you were struggling with it, the truth is that the physical body is an empty shell. So all there is consciousness. And consciousness has a response to that which is true, that which is supportive of life. And there's no response to that which doesn't. So the muscle test is valid, but the thing is, you have to be such a scientist in your position about it that you don't have an intention, you don't have an answer, you're seeking, you don't, there's a saying for the truth seeker, I don't care what the truth is as long as it's true. You have to have that alignment to really have muscle testing work. And there's so many influences because everything's energetic. So it could be music that's in the background. Doc had said that married couples tend to not be good partners in testing, because there's so many layers there. If someone's smiling at you, all those things influence.
Right.
So my thing is, if you don't like the muscle test or you have issues with it, I totally understand. But if you're really, really looking for the why of it, he did publish a PhD thesis explaining it, and there's equations, the whole science of it. I have it, and it's way over my head, but when I was a little younger and a little more full of fire, I would kind of throw that in people's face of like, do you understand this? Well, then don't have a question,
Right.
But no matter how one may feel about the muscle testing, it takes nothing away from the truth of the words of the teachings, and I feel like the more you evolve, the more obvious the truth of muscle testing is. It's an energetic thing, a consciousness thing. And we're so identified with form that we Doc said when he first saw it, it was John Diamond, and he had the context of it was your body knows.
Right.
So if you had some lettuce that had pesticides versus non-pesticides, the body would have a weak response. And he said everyone at that lecture thought it was a body response, but because of where he was at in terms of consciousness, he was like, well, I know that the body has zero response. It's a consciousness response.
Right.
And that just, started the whole thing.
Right.
So I would say, humble yourself and allow instead of having an opinion, try to let it reveal itself to you.
It's very hard to be non-biased, especially people calibrate politics. And whoa, I remember early on in the day, in the time of MySpace, there was somebody that calibrated Ron Paul at 480, and I was like, a naive person that I was early on, I thought, oh, for sure that's true. And then I started watching Ron Paul videos all of a sudden.
Well, the thing is too, though, is that there's layers. The calibration is a general calibration. There's parts of all of us that are not on the level, and there's some parts that are very high. It's the general calibration. And even some people, they themselves might not calibrate that high, but their influence as a social figure has a certain calibration.
Right.
So, all those subtleties, that's kind of creates my position of I don't do it, not against it. Maybe I will do it one day. And sometimes it crosses my mind of, yeah, I should be doing it. But I just, that's not where I'm at on my path,
Right. What do you, okay, you said influence people. That's interesting. Let's take, for example, Norman Vincent Peale, thinking about 435 influence. So do you think his personal calibration was close to that, or it might have been lower, but his influence was still high?
Yeah, well, there was in Truth versus Falsehood, he calibrates a lot of people, and he
Yeah.
always is very specific. This is their influence in society. So there's like Joe DiMaggio, a great baseball player who had a certain energy that was held through his identity as Joe DiMaggio to the people. Had nothing really to do with him as a person, and I don't know what he calibrates that or not. But I think, and even Doc would say that for the most part, the person calibrates close to what their work is. There's some exceptions. I think it's Rembrandt. His paintings are like 700,
Right.
but he's not at 700. It comes through them. Their openness in terms of, there's so many aspects of us. So like there's the aspect of the artist, and their alignment is so open that the divine can come through them, through their art. But that doesn't make them an angel.
Like the Estonian composer Arvo Part. I think his some of his works are very high, and I watched some of his biographical thing, like a speech he once gave, and apparently one time in the 70s he was writing music in front of a church, and it wasn't going well. And this girl walks up to him, and she's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm writing music. I'm trying to write music, but it's going really badly. And this is a 10-year-old girl, right? And she goes, have you thanked God for this failure already? And that's what changed his whole spiritual life. And he started praying more. And I think, and he said that the most sensitive musical instrument is the human soul.
Yes.
And I was like, whoa, like goosebumps. Yes. Like that's amazing.
Doc wrote about music that music, I think he said it, maybe I'm mistaken, but music is the highest art form because it's invisible, like God, the invisible art form. Yeah. Maybe he didn't say that. I should be careful about that, but I heard it. I heard the quote anyway. I think he did say it. I don't know. It doesn't matter, but it's still a valid quote.
Right. That's some of the Robert Gass music they used to play at lectures, that Om Namah Shivaya and Hallelujah. That's
it can move you to tears, and it's that's where music differs from other art forms. The power of the emotional response through music.
Did any of the calibrations for the music surprise you when you first saw it?
Yeah, I was surprised that some music being in the 700s, like whoa, and it made me listen with a different ear, and when you really understand that, it's like, okay, you hear the divine in it. I was surprised at I come from the early 90s, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, rap music and all those things.
Oh yeah.
Some rap music calibrates over 200. Obviously some doesn't.
Right.
There's some, like the Beatles were in the 460s. I thought that was interesting. George Harrison is 499, and I thought maybe he'd even be higher.
I think you're 540. I think 540.
No, I think his he calibrated, I think, at maybe like the low 500s, but I think his music was like 499 or something. I could be mistaken.
Okay.
But he's very devotional in his work. He talked about the Beatles. I love that he did that. He grew up, or he didn't grow up, but he was young enough in the 60s and that whole era. So he kind of understands, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, they all appeal to him. And I thought that was kind of cool.
I thought the calibration of, was it Ray Charles and Louis Armstrong was really high.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. It
was like 580 or something, or 590.
Yeah, he's up there. And I like Louis Armstrong. He doesn't really appeal to me on that level, but I hear it. I hear why it's there.
So just a general question. So how, after you read Power versus Force and doing the spiritual work, how has your life changed? Did you have any, because I know in my life, sometimes you go through a bit of disasters or catastrophes and all that.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. The work is everything to me. It is the foundation of my spirituality. I think the biggest thing it did was it helped me understand Christ. And that's the low hanging fruit on the spiritual path, is at least here is Christianity. And there's things about Christ I just, the teachings in terms of religion, I just didn't get. Christ died on this cross for your sins, he was the Son of God, all these things. And the way the teachings helped me reconcile the truth of those statements. And there was a little self homework I did years ago where I wrote down everything he said about Christ, and
Wow.
how how Christ was never had a previous life. He came from the Godhead, so he didn't speak about past lives and reincarnation, because it wasn't part of his thing. And he came, I love Buddha too. Buddha and Christ are my two guys. And Buddha brought the path of enlightenment, and Christ brought the path of salvation. They're not the same thing. And Christ was very practical, because he came to the West where people were still worshiping the golden calf, whereas Buddha was in the East, which was already an ancient culture, and enlightenment is already kind of well accepted there. And it really helped me understand that, and how the dying for our sins. He said that over the eons of time of mankind, we've raped and pillaged and done all these things, but through even if our belief in what God was horribly misguided, it was still faith in God, what we believe to be divine. So even if we're worshiping the bear god, it's what we understood to be divinity. And by virtue of that, it earned a karmic merit to get a savior. And I got it, and when he died, he went to the crucifixion. It was a karmic debt that he counterbalanced that we had. And I got it. It was like, yes, and so that really helped me. And the other thing with the work and my own personal walk is that there was a teaching he gave, and he said, some people throw caution into the wind, and they pray and they say, God, whatever it is between me and you, bring it up to be healed. And he said, if you do that, be careful, because it's going to come up.
I have a story about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And but the thing is, he put fine print on that. And I didn't pay attention to that part. He said, don't do it, or it's not recommended that you do it if you haven't cultivated a healthy enough sense of self-love, because the things that come up are really going to be tough. And I just did it, and the chaos ensued. And it was a very rough path that almost took me out, seriously. And through the grace of God and through the work I've done, I've been able to fight through that. And but that teaching was very profound.
Like it almost killed you, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the darkness within the ego is as infinite as the love of God. And when you allow that darkness to come up, and you haven't cultivated that self-love to understand that this is the nature of the ego, it's okay, it could be really rough. And the ego is so subtle in how it lures you into guilt. One of my favorite, 1,000 favorite teachings of the doc is that guilt is narcissism. It's a subtle attempt to manipulate God. And the subtleties of the ego are amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Look how I suffer. I should be giving credit. Look how
exactly.
I suffer.
You're trying to rattle the gates of heaven and trying to force God's hand. And but when you're in the ego, it's so overwhelming that you lose sight of that. So yeah, the work has changed everything, and I'm glad it's there. And like I said, it really has brought me. The work is my focus. The teachings, the books, the lectures, but it really brought me closer to Christ. And even Doc would always humbly bow to Christ, and I love that. And I think that in terms of my spiritual walk, Christ is such a powerful figure. One of the teachings of Christ that I struggled with was only those, you don't get to God except by through me.
Right.
And I didn't get that. And a lot of Christians take that a certain way, where you have to be a Christian and you have to be with Jesus. But Jesus was just Christ in form. Christ is a consciousness. And Christ is the highest body before the Atmic. The Atmic is the Godhead, then it's the Christ body, then the Buddhic body. So in reality, you have to go through the Christ body to get to the Atmic body. But that doesn't necessarily mean I have to take Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior and be a Christian or I'm going to hell.
Right. Most Christians wouldn't accept that interpretation, though. There would be, it has to be through Jesus, right?
Yeah, that's how that belief is held. It's through Jesus. And Jesus was just Christ in the flesh. So the form part of it is not as critical as Christ. Christ is eternal. Christ is beyond form.
Yes.
So there's not a requirement, even though Jesus in form was here to be that easy access, to be that floating ember in the ocean to hold on to. Because we're so identified with form that to have something in form is very helpful.
I love that you said that he paid off our karmic debt in a way, and I've heard Doc talk about it, but I never maybe I should listen more, because I've never heard quite that he actually paid off a lot of our debt of sin, because otherwise we'd probably be in karmic jail or whatever for a while.
And he
there's
also
the grace of God.
Yes, and the high gates that he spoke about, that he went through, and Christ went through it, Buddha went through it. It's all the same thing. It's the temptation that Christ went through, sweating blood in the Garden of Gethsemane, and how those are real things. Buddha felt like his bones were being broken. That is the absolute high gates of the ego. And one thing I've been coming to is that what's called Satan is the ego. That inversion within consciousness, that I am me, I am God. That's what the ego is. And that is, in a way, Satan. So when Christ was being tempted by Satan, he was being tempted by the ego to take power, to misuse it. And luckily for us all, he didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what would happen if God sent his only son, and then his son failed the test, and all of a sudden he's becoming the king of the world? God would be like, oh no, I have to send another one.
Well, and the other thing that I love about the teachings is the second coming of Christ. How the transition of consciousness above the level of integrity was the second coming of Christ. And if there's a form needed, it might happen. But really, and Doc said this, the battle's already won. The battle over those dark forces is already won when that happened. So
okay,
I take the peace in that.
What about okay, I'm tying in, and this is too much maybe for the short window we have, because we're almost at the end, but a lot of people are concerned nowadays because of politics and so forth. So but I think Doc would say to surrender that to God, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is very trying times we're in terms of worldliness, and where are we going as a world and society. But the best teaching to remember is Doc said that for the true seeker of enlightenment, it is a luxury to be engaged in the affairs of the world that the true seeker of enlightenment cannot afford. So there is another path, which is the social saint, whose alignment is to be involved in the world, be involved in the politics, be involved in those things, and do what you can to change it. And there's a great honorable thing in that. But if your thing is enlightenment, you can't afford it. The work is within, not without. And so I get it, because I feel it too, where it's like, dude, what is going on in the world right now?
Right.
But it's not my place.
Right.
Trusting God, it's his problem. Whether we survive or die is God's problem, and that takes a certain surrender.
Right. He designed it this way, so it's his credit and his fault as well.
Exactly.
Exactly. There's a quote. I think there's a Doc quote like that. Wanting the world to be different is presuming to know more about the world than God does.
Exactly. Wow. Omniscience is only of God. So to proclaim anything as good or bad is proclaiming omniscience. So humility is that I know nothing. And it's true. I know nothing. Let it be revealed. And trust in God. Trust that God is not one thing Doc said, God is not half of a duality. God is all. And one of my favorite teachings, I keep saying that, is that all is God. And to think that there's anything else but that is a baseless vanity. It's the same vanity that proclaims authorship over our positions and our experiences. Ego, pure ego. And the ego doesn't even exist. That's the tricky part. All the ego could ever be said to be is a focus of awareness within consciousness.
Right.
So all there is consciousness.
It's like you have a vision, but your vision is like this. It's very small.
A pinhole on an infinite tapestry. It's not our business. If you're about enlightenment, it's not our business. Like, it's God's business.
Well, the thing I've noticed though, because I know a lot of doc students, is it's almost like, it's not a religion, obviously, but there's people, because there's such a big amount of work and big amount of books, and there's social commentary, political commentary, commentary in health, all those, commentary religions. So such big amount of work that some people are more focusing on the devotional, and some people are more focusing on the references, the political side or the Western worlds. If you want to go to the Western world route, that'll be a long intellectual route, and then
yeah, Doc taught the path to God through the mind and the heart, and yes. You could get there both ways, but the mind, and Doc said this, the ego and the mind are one and the same thing. There is no mind, there is no ego, there is no soul. It's only when one is holding that, when it's, you're only subject, when the laws of consciousness that's in letting go, one is primarily only subject to what is held in mind, conscious and unconscious, with some karmic precautions involved. But the mind is the ego, and it's very challenging to dissolve the ego with the ego. The heart is God. The heart is the love. God is love. The heart is love, that spiritual center. So when you submit to that, the lotus flower blooms. It's a lot easier than going through the mind, which is a minefield of chaos.
Right. There's a famous Winston Churchill quote that says, in his first actually autobiography, when he wrote when she was really young, but I thought there was a profound statement that he thought that predestination and free will are the same thing, which kind of, I think, talks about what God talked about, which is your future is attracting, your future self or your future destiny is attracting you. So it may be for him, he chose maybe before he came that he was going to be that, just like maybe some people chose to be presidents, or I don't know what else. And
I think it's in alignment with the frequency.
Okay.
Doc did say that free will does exist, because if it didn't, there'd be no karma. There'd be no need for a savior. So there is free will. But also, when you're in a frequency, like especially the lower levels, he had said that the etheric brain doesn't happen till above 200. Below that, there's a different karmic debt, because you actually are not making decisions. There really isn't that much free will in those lower levels, right? Because you're awash in the energy. There really isn't the ability to choose. You're just subject to that energy field. When you get above 200 and the etheric brain is there, now the karmic debt is way different. Personal karma is now a thing. Below that, it's more of a group karma. Wow. Once you have the etheric brain, once you have the true ability to choose, now the karmic debt is way different. And so I think, in a matter of speaking, there isn't free will. There is free will. There is choice. There's choice within consciousness and all these things. But it takes a certain level of awareness to really own the decision. Otherwise, you're just being awash in everything else.
All right. Well, this has been a pleasure, Kevin, to be on the podcast and talking about Doc. I think Like I said before to you off air, if one person comes to Doc, is there somebody coming?
Yeah, 1 second, just 1 second. Don't
cool.
let's not stop. Hey, yeah, just 1 second. I'm gonna wrap this up. Sorry about that.
I love these moments. All right, so
sorry.
Yeah, just thank you again for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure having you on.
Yes, hey, thank you for having me. It really was fun. I kind of regret that I had this meeting right now because we're on fire right now, but maybe we can do it again.
Yeah, that's it. All right, and thank you everybody for listening and watching. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.